For 17 years, researchers at Skinwalker Ranch documented paranormal activity funded by the Department of Defense. What they discovered about Bigfoot's presence there is more terrifying than anything they expected. My name is Dave Mitchell, and in the summer of 2007, I first drove through the ranch gates with a defense-sized budget, not to hunt Bigfoot, but to neutralize the area's strangeness. What I found was geology corrupted by the impossible, strange lights, surgically taken cattle, and massive footprints. Every advanced thermal array we deployed to track the creature failed. It wasn't interference, it was an intelligent silence. We spent the first year documenting what the ranch refused to show us. A 17-year vigil in a place that actively defended its secrets. The first thermal anomaly we tracked that year was so massive, so fast, that my entire team argued it had to be a malfunction. But I stood in the control room, watching the digital readout of that impossibly large signature, and saw it stop, not at a ridgeline or a thicket of trees, but precisely where the faint glow of the valley's civilization ended. Our earliest data confirmed the impossible. The massive thermal signature we tracked wasn't moving like a man or a known animal. It vanished mid-stride, right where the Uintah Basin light pollution ended. We had christened the largest, most consistent entity we tracked as the Silent Anomaly, not because it was quiet, but because our instruments failed to register it physically, even while its heat signature screamed across the thermal imaging software. We saw it primarily in the cold, pre-dawn hours, near the boundary fences, where the human world gave way to the deep, unsettled wilderness of the ranch. The signature was consistent, approximately 7.5 feet tall, weighing what we estimated to be 600 pounds, and moving with a bipedal, incredibly powerful stride. Yet, when we sent out a rapid response team to intercept, we would find nothing but stillness and silence. The footprints would abruptly cut off, disappearing halfway through the impact phase, leaving a clean, undisturbed divot in the otherwise muddy soil. This was the first terrifying clue. Whatever this creature was, its existence was not bound by the standard rules of physics. The first time I witnessed the disappearance live was on a cold November night at 2010. I was in the command center, watching the real-time feed. The Silent Anomaly was moving at a casual speed, maybe 7 miles per hour. Then, without breaking stride, the heat signature simply ceased to exist. No cooling, no fade, no burst of energy. The object became instantly indistinguishable from the background temperature of the forest. The data suggested a 0-point energy dissipation, or, more disturbingly, a momentary phase shift out of our visible spectrum. The shock wasn't the size of the entity. The shock was the data gap it left behind. We had come prepared for an ape. We had found a ghost that cast a shadow. If this large, living creature could simply blink out of existence on command, then the true mystery wasn't Sasquatch, but the environment that allowed it to perform magic. The locals talk about the cattle mutilations, but what they don't mention are the formations, perfect 90-degree angles pressed into the thick, protective fur left at the edge of the property line. We spent years documenting the ranch's most notorious phenomena, yet the most unsettling discovery was the collision of the primal and the precise. When the team found the first massive tracks near the North Pasture in 2012, the euphoria was brief. The tracks were unequivocal, 15 inches long, 5 inches wide at the heel, confirming the immense size of the entity we were tracking. But 7 feet away, lying on the ground, was the hide of a taken bull. The edges were clean, almost laser cut, which was standard for a mutilation. What wasn't standard was the pattern. Embedded in the thick, coarse hair were two sets of indentations that formed a perfect square, followed by a triangle that split into two 90-degree angles. It looked like a stamp or a signature left by a colossal intellect. The tracks represented immense, raw biological power. The hide represented chilling, calculating precision. It shattered our working theory that we were tracking a highly evolved ape. We realized the phenomenon wasn't Sasquatch or anomalous technology. It was Sasquatch interacting with anomalous technology, or perhaps embodying both. That square, pressed deep into the fur, was a warning, or maybe an invitation, telling us that this creature was governed by geometry and rules we didn't understand. We eventually collected 27 hides with similar patterns, each one more unsettling than the last. The evidence was clear. The creature we called the Silent Anomaly understood math, and it was leaving us a complex cipher built out of animal remains and fear. What was the language of a being that could vanish and yet also use a protractor? We called them tetrahedrons, massive, high tree breaks arranged in geometric patterns that stretched for a mile, as if a colossal intellect was using the forest as its chalkboard. Tracking. The Silent Anomaly often meant following the signs of its brute strength, but the true terror came from recognizing the purpose behind the destruction. Sasquatch sign is typically chaotic. Trampled brush, random branch, snapping. But here, the pine trees, often 40 feet high with trunks nearly 2 feet thick, were snapped cleanly at precisely 9 feet from the base and laid down in specific mathematical arrangements. In one sector of the ranch's southwestern acreage, we found a series of tree breaks defining a large, perfect, equilateral triangle, its lines running for hundreds of yards. It was a physical manifestation of the geometry we had observed in the taken animal remains. Analyzing the physics of the breaks, our engineers calculated that the required shear force exceeded the strength of any known terrestrial primate. The creature was powerful, but the arrangement spoke of careful planning, not random aggression. It was a communication system designed for eyes much higher than ours, or perhaps for creatures that could see patterns on a grander scale. This led us to our most unsettling find in 2015. After meticulously mapping the latest tetrahedron, we discovered that one of the shattered trees was an imposter. It was the correct size, snapped at the correct height, and placed in the correct geometric position. But when my lead researcher, Dr. Chen, tested the fibers, she realized the core wasn't wood at all. It was a dense, highly compressed composite, wrapped in a thin layer of natural pine bark, designed to be indistinguishable from the other trees at a distance. If an immense, biological entity was setting up camouflage, it meant its intelligence was far beyond what we imagined, and its surveillance system might already be active. After weeks of silence, the hydrophones finally captured it. A deep, subsonic groan that wasn't wail or seismic, but matched the frequency signature of the unexplained aerial phenomena reports. Our search for Sasquatch increasingly felt like tracking the wrong thing. The entity behaved like an environmental phenomenon. To test this, we sank sensitive hydrophones deep into the rock strata, tuned to capture extremely low-frequency vibrations. In March of 2016, the instruments were delivered. Just after midnight, an incredibly powerful, rhythmic subsonic resonance, a sound centered around 10 Hz, rattled the receivers. Dr. Chen immediately cross-referenced this acoustic signature with Federal Aviation Administration data on unexplained aerial craft, UAC, sightings. The match was nearly perfect. The Sasquatch vocalization shared the exact same fundamental frequency as the low-frequency energy associated with the UAC reports. This was the link. The creature wasn't just on the ranch, it was part of its strange communication network. As the terrifying low rumble peaked, a silent, perfectly black triangle appeared over the northern ridge. The groans ceased the moment the object began to glow, confirming our deepest fear. We were witnessing a dialogue. Every researcher knows the rules of the ranch. You are never alone. But that night, the man in the shadows wasn't spectral. It was a physical, breathing sentinel watching our compound from the northern mesa. We had grown accustomed to the intermittent spectral figures, the shadow people that moved at the periphery of our vision. This was different. In the early hours of an October morning at 2017, Dr. Chen called me to the optical telescope. Through the lens, perfectly framed against the pale grey of the rising sun, was the entity. It was impossibly large, silhouetted, standing on a jagged peak, known to us as the Three Peaks Mesa, over 2 miles distant. The height was undeniable, at least 8 feet tall, and it was motionless, a black obelisk of tissue and bone simply watching the compound below. It stood in that single spot for nearly 5 hours, through the complete color shift from pre-dawn gray to full morning light, never shifting weight, never blinking. We ran every diagnostic, confirming it was the same biomass consistent with the Silent Anomaly. Only now it was acting with calculated purpose. It was surveillance, a silent pressure cooker of paranoia designed to remind us that our operations were under constant superior review. The observation felt less like studying a phenomenon and more like being the specimen itself. As the morning fully broke, the figure finally moved. It turned its massive frame away from our compound, took 2 slow strides, and walked directly into a shimmering patch of blue light that suddenly materialized near the mesa's edge. The light pulsed once, expanding briefly to surround the creature, and then both the light and the sentinel were gone, leaving only the sound of the desert wind. If the creature was their guide, who or what were they? Following the thermal trail, we located a shallow, unmarked cave that shouldn't have existed, but inside, the air was cold, silent, and our recording equipment registered a deafening, pure white static. The convergence zone often yielded temporary anomalies, but this was different. In the summer of 2018, our remote sensors began reporting a persistent, localized drop in temperature, nearly 30 degrees Fahrenheit below the ambient air, emanating from a thicket of brush previously deemed impenetrable. When the team manually breached the undergrowth, we found a fissure in the rock face that opened into a surprisingly large cavity, a small cave carved not by water, but by some immense, deliberate force. As soon as we crossed the threshold, all communications failed. The internal air pressure felt unnatural, almost compressive, and the sound of our own breathing was amplified to a distracting degree. This was a place where the creature physically resided, or perhaps a place it utilized as a temporary dimensional staging area. The most alarming effect was on our recording gear. Every single microphone, thermal camera, and magnetic sensor we brought in recorded the exact same thing. A perfect, saturated wall of white noise, the hiss of television snow, but without any acoustic input. It was the sound of information being deliberately and completely scrubbed. We spent 2 hours inside, gathering geological samples, the whole time feeling the unnatural cold seep into our bones. The sensory deprivation was total. The only trace of the creature was the lingering scent, a powerful, earthy musk mingled with something metallic, like ozone or burnt wire. As we retreated, the white static followed us, ceasing only when we were 50 feet from the cave's mouth. We knew we had found a lair, but what did a large physical entity need with a silent, frozen room that erased sound and vision? It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A juvenile Sasquatch, smaller and clearly injured, was left directly in our line of sight near the compound perimeter, a silent, impossible plea for help. In all our years of tracking, this was the first time the entity had willingly compromised its hidden status. The young creature, perhaps 3.5 feet tall, was lying partially concealed beneath a juniper bush, whimpering softly. Our thermal imaging showed a high fever and a severe, untreated wound to its upper thigh. The sudden introduction of a vulnerable living specimen created an immediate, paralyzing ethical crisis within the team. Every protocol demanded immediate capture and scientific study, the physical proof the world craved. But 17 years of witnessing its intelligence demanded caution and, surprisingly, a measure of respect. Dr. Chen argued that the positioning was too deliberate to ignore, a moral hazard meant to test our intentions. Was the parent using the juvenile as bait, or was this a calculated act of trust, observing how we handled a creature in distress? We spent 3 tense hours debating, watching the small form shiver in the cold desert air, fully aware that every second we delayed was a decision made. We chose assistance over acquisition. As we prepared non-sedative pain relievers and approached the fence line, a new, massive thermal signature appeared silently on the high ridge overlooking our position. It was the Silent Anomaly, standing motionless, watching our attempt to help the juvenile. We had broken protocol, but we had passed the first test. The creature made no sound, offered no aggression, but its presence was a clear threat, a line drawn in the dirt. We were caught, suspended between 2 impossible choices: save the young creature and risk the wrath of the adult, or betray its trust and confirm the creature's suspicion of humanity. We retreated, but not without leaving a gift: a large, ripe watermelon, placed exactly where the creature could retrieve it without crossing our barrier. The moment the adult entity appeared on the ridge, we understood that the trust test was underway, and any physical intervention would be seen as an act of aggression. Instead, we performed an act of surrender. We left the medical supplies, along with the large melon, a non-native high-value food source, at the foot of the juvenile's location, and withdrew completely, leaving the ranch quiet and waiting. The next morning, the juvenile creature was gone, the medical supplies were untouched, and the watermelon was precisely split in half, its contents entirely consumed. We had passed the first hurdle, demonstrating non-hostile intent. But what we found lying on the dew-damp ground where the melon had rested was far more disturbing than a thank you note. It was a piece of perfectly smooth, highly polished obsidian stone, about the size of a human palm. Obsidian is volcanic glass. There is no natural obsidian within 300 miles of the ranch. The stone was warm to the touch and inscribed with 6 unrecognizable glyphs, symbols carved with surgical precision that defied explanation. We immediately scanned the stone, finding traces of an unknown composite material in the carvings. The exchange was clear. The creature accepted the sustenance, but offered a token of impossible origin, a message written in a language of the unknown. We had attempted communication with simple food, and the Sasquatch had responded with a piece of evidence that broke every known geological, linguistic, and chronological rule. Our primal creature was not only intelligent, it was using objects that should not exist to communicate a complex idea. What exactly were these symbols trying to tell us about the entity, and more unsettlingly, about the rock upon which we stood? We abandoned the scientific method and tried an act of total trust, leaving our most advanced night vision camera running for 24 hours in the heart of the forest, completely unprotected. After the exchange of the watermelon and the obsidian glyphs, we understood that this was not a creature to be trapped, but an intelligence to be negotiated with. Our goal shifted from acquisition to pure data exchange. We selected a high-definition, military-grade camera equipped with a wide-angle lens and passive thermal sensors, and placed it on a stable tripod deep within the area where the entity most often manifested. It was an unprecedented risk. The equipment was worth nearly $80,000. The tension during the long wait was crippling. We knew that if the creature simply disabled the hardware, our effort was wasted and our trust misplaced. When we returned to the location exactly 24 hours later, the tripod was untouched. The camera, however, was gone. The air went immediately cold. Our initial analysis confirmed the obvious. The creature had taken the apparatus. But then, my lead security officer pointed to a smooth, flat granite rock approximately 10 feet away. Sitting neatly atop the rock, wiped completely clean of any debris or moisture, was the camera's SD card. The creature had surgically removed the only valuable component, the digital memory, and left it for us to find. This demonstrated not only immense intelligence and technical understanding, but a strange form of cooperation. It had taken the hardware, presumably to study it or prevent us from tracking its location, while consciously preserving the data. The Silent Anomaly wanted us to see what it had recorded, but on its terms. I carefully picked up the tiny card, my hand shaking slightly, realizing that everything we had learned in 17 years was condensed onto this single, small piece of plastic. We had been granted a viewing privilege. The screen flickered, showing 18 hours of static pine and silent darkness, until 3:07 anti-meridium, when the woods dissolved into a green-tinged kaleidoscope, and the camera was gently lifted off the ground by an immense hand. We were gathered in the command center, watching the video playback on the large screen, the tension in the room thick and unforgiving. The first 18 hours were unremarkable, just wind, shadows, and the ambient temperature of the desert night. Then, at 3:03 anti-meridium, the image suddenly warped. The colors intensified to unnatural greens and blues, and the frame rate stuttered, suggesting a localized spatial disturbance, similar to what we observed near the caves. Then, it appeared, the camera was slowly tilted upward, revealing the full form of the Silent Anomaly. The image quality was pristine, validating the creature's careful handling of the memory card. Its eyes were large, dark, and reflective, conveying a startling depth of intelligence, and the muscles beneath the coarse, dark brown fur were immense, moving with a silent, controlled power. For a full 90 seconds, the entity simply studied the lens, its face inches from the camera, confirming every historical sighting and adding an unbearable level of reality. The creature finally lowered the camera, placing it back on the ground. But before it released the hardware, its massive head turned, looking directly through the lens, past the camera, past the time difference, and straight at us. Then, it opened its mouth and emitted the exact same 10 Hz subsonic groan we had recorded months before, the acoustic signature of the unidentified aerial craft. The video cut to static immediately. It was a calculated message. I see you. I know your sound. And this is my truth. The creature had not only revealed itself, but had deliberately connected itself to the most profound mystery of the ranch. Our final breakthrough came from the soil analysis. The tracks we found weren't just deep. They were surrounded by soil, that was simultaneously 17 years newer and 3,000 years older than the surrounding Earth. After the video footage confirmed that the Silent Anomaly was directly connected to the ranch's dimensional anomalies, we went back to the most fundamental physical evidence, the footprints. Dr. Chen theorized that if the creature could phase out of our dimension, its physical passage must leave a measurable disturbance in the immediate environment. We carefully excavated a set of recent tracks and took core samples of the surrounding sediment. The results, once calibrated through radiometric dating, were scientifically shattering. The immediate subsurface layer, the dirt surrounding the deep print, registered a temporal fluctuation. 80% of the soil was consistent with the 2023 ambient geological age, but mixed into that same sample were microscopic traces of sediment that dated back to the late Bronze Age, specifically 3,000 years ago, alongside completely unweathered, almost pristine, inorganic compounds that could only have formed a few weeks prior. The creature's passage wasn't just physical, it was chronological. Every stride it took on the ranch created a localized, momentary chronological disconnect, pulling materials from the deep past and the near future into the present. This was the true answer to the geometry and the vanishing acts. The creature was not merely inhabiting this space. It was utilizing the ranch as a gateway, a non-linear traveler. If the Silent Anomaly could bridge millennia with a single step, the obsidian stone it left behind was not a message in a foreign language, but a warning written in time. Our satellite phone, which should have been off-network, rang once. The voice on the other end was robotic, calm, and delivered a single, chilling message. Containment is over. You are now the witness. For 17 years, our operation had been invisible, funded and monitored by agencies that never spoke their name. We had relied on the deep, classified silence to shield us from the chaos of public scrutiny and the interference of overt government intervention. That silence shattered in the summer of 2024. The phone was a secure line, used only for emergency extractions. For it to ring meant something catastrophic, something terminal. I grabbed the receiver, my hand sweating, and heard the synthesized, emotionless voice repeat the statement, along with a time code and coordinates precisely matching our location. The message wasn't a warning, it was a notification. The people who owned the ranch, and by extension, owned us, had decided to conclude the experiment. The implication was immediate and terrifying. All the barriers, the electromagnetic shielding, the perimeter patrols, the political firewalls, were being intentionally dissolved. Our mission was over, and the chaos we had worked so hard to contain was about to flood in. We realized that our 17 years of research hadn't been an investigation. It had been a containment project, and we, the scientists, were now expendable witnesses. I looked up at the compound's monitors. The forest was utterly still, but the low subsonic resonance we associated with the Silent Anomaly was rising rapidly on the acoustic meter. Just as the reading peaked, a dark, angular shape slipped silently through the moonless sky. It wasn't the black triangle of the UAC. It was an unidentifiable drone, hovering directly over our command center, silently confirming that our isolation had ended and our exposure had begun. We had 3 hours before the site would be intentionally flooded with electromagnetic interference. My last act wasn't to destroy the research. It was to leave the tunnel open for the shadow that watched the trees. The robotic voice on the phone had confirmed our worst fears. The containment was over, and the facility was about to be rendered useless by a focused electromagnetic pulse erasing every sensor, hard drive, and data log on the property. We were in a frantic, desperate race to extract 17 years of evidence before it was all turned to static. My team was already packing the most critical components: the obsidian stone, the soil samples, the single recovered hard drive containing the 3:07 anti-meridiem footage. Protecting the data was paramount, but I couldn't leave the Silent Anomaly trapped in the volatile containment zone. I grabbed the remote, not opening the human gate, but the shielded ventilation tunnel leading into the canyon lands. I unlocked the exit and left the access codes visible. As I sped away, my headlights illuminated the Silent Anomaly, standing perfectly still near the tunnel. It didn't move, just watched the headlights recede. A silent, colossal figure, acknowledging the necessity of survival. I was sacrificing scientific discovery, but granting the creature a final, desperate freedom. I was now a fugitive, carrying the biggest secret in human history. Leaving the ranch meant saving the data and preserving the creature's freedom. Within 24 hours, my team published the archive, revealing thermal anomalies, the acoustic link, and 3,000-year-old soil samples. The internet exploded. The temporal distortion and obsidian glyphs proved Sasquatch was a non-linear traveler, a guardian unbound by our time. Weeks later, the obsidian stone on my desk suddenly vibrated, and its carved glyphs glowed blue. The message was not over. 17 years of containment, shattered by a single glowing stone. The Silent Anomaly proved that the greatest secrets travel through time. If you want to continue this journey, subscribe and share this archive. The temporal gate remains open, and the message on the obsidian is still resonating. What comes through next is entirely up to the shadows.